listening to the Ballroom Network. The following program is intended for all audiences. Welcome to the Fantasy Football Goon Podcast with your hosts, Joe Mandel, the Goon, and John Santucci, the Tooch. We're bringing you the fantasy football knowledge that you need every single week.
Derrick Henry still going. Stays in bounds. He might go. 99 yards for the touchdown. Unbelievable.
Flushed out again all the way back. Turning the corner. Fires downfield. Caught. Touchdown. Only Mahomes turns what might have been a 15-yard sack into a 27-yard touchdown.
Saquon Barkley across midfield, down the sideline, stayed in bounds, and Barkley takes it all the way. 68 yards for his first NFL touchdown. McCaffrey right up the middle, and he is gone for the touchdown. 58 yards. Pass is to Thomas. He's gone. Touchdown Saints.
Okay, it's time for the easiest part of any coach's job, the cut. Now, while I wasn't able to cut everyone I wanted to, I have cut a lot of you. Steven, I like your hustle. That's why it was so hard to cut you. Congratulations, the rest of you made the team. Except you, and you.
God bless fantasy football. There are many things a man can do with his time. And this is better than those things.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Goon Show. I'm your host, Joe Mandel, the Goon, and I'm joined by a very special guest filling in for John Santucci, the Tooch, Aldo Gandia, the barkeeper, the Godfather himself. Aldo, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. I am really happy to fill in for the Tooch, but I'm going to forewarn the audience. I am nowhere near the fantasy football expert Johnny Santucci is, but I'm here to have some fun, learn a little bit, and share the little bit that I know from my experiences as a fantasy football player with the audience. And one of the things that I'm looking forward to talking is about getting ready for the fantasy football playoffs, and which is something that I always try to do in the middle of the season. This year, I'm only playing on one fantasy football team, Joe, and your league, and I'm on the edge, man. I'm fighting for my playoff life, but just in case I make it to the playoffs, I'm going to be prepared to field the best team possible with the poor lineup I drafted.
It's fun. We got tons of people in the chat, Berlissimo and our buddy Chris Gonzalez swinging by to say hello. Chris, of course, saying how excited Aldo is for his experience. But I'm very excited to have you, Aldo. I'm excited to talk fantasy playoffs, like you said. And, we had a game today, which is weird, a Wednesday afternoon game. I can't say I've ever said that before out loud, but Steelers-Ravens, the league finally got the game done. And although it was a bit of a dud, Steelers won 19-14. Wasn't a whole lot of offense in this one. And, the Steelers got another win. They're still undefeated, but the league itself is dealing with some coronavirus issues right now.
Yeah, it's sad on how the virus has kind of marred the season. And, the NFL has done a fairly good job of taking care of things. They probably could have learned a few more things from the NBA. But kudos to you as a fantasy football owner and commissioner that you have done a great job managing our league. And I don't know if other fantasy football owners can say the same about how their commissioner has dealt with all the blows that the NFL has given us with COVID.
Yeah, it's really important. It's something we've talked about throughout the year, and how you need to have a good commissioner that's going to give you IR spots that COVID players can go on. Although I'm on one league that has a commissioner that will not put any IR spots, and my entire bench is either guys that are actually on IR or guys with COVID, and somehow I'm still going to make the playoffs.
Whoa. Well, that's, you're the goon. Of course you're going to make the playoffs.
It was the biggest task I think I've ever had to take on. But now I got to go win a championship, and then I can become the commissioner of that league.
Now, I'm in one league. How many leagues are you in?
16.
Ooh, man, oh man. Now, back in the day when I first got into fantasy, I think the most was 1 year I had 12. And it takes a lot of time to manage multiple leagues. And when you're up to 16, I would imagine you're probably putting in about 16 hours a week.
Yeah, it's crazy. Between this show and keeping up with all my teams, it literally is like a full-time job. But, I love it so much, it's not like work.
Yeah.
And Chris, only one league I've been trash. All my other leagues, I'm good. So you can't win them all, man. It's impossible.
No, absolutely not. Especially because you don't want to draft the same team in every league. So you're going to set aside a league or two that you're going to take some chances on. Last year, when I came back to fantasy football after 6 years away, I decided to take a chance with my first round pick. I thought that maybe David Montgomery was going to be the Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs in his rookie year. Obviously, that didn't work out, and so that meant a disastrous season for me. I should never have taken that chance and paid for it. But this year, I took a more traditional approach, and so far, I'm a little bit. I think I'm at 500 or a little above 500.
Hey, it's all it takes to get in the playoffs. I mean, there's been so many weird. You've had studs go from highs to lows this year. You've had guys that are just not performing. One of the biggest things we've talked about every single week is how tight end has become a complete wasteland in fantasy. How there's literally like 2 good tight ends and everything else is just kind of like a crap show, But
it seems like that happens in fantasy football. It goes in cycles where there's certain periods of time where the tight end kind of disappears. And then there's a few years where tight ends are just like, you're drafting tight ends in the first couple of rounds because they're so good. And so right now, and I think, COVID has impaired so many things. You talk to gamblers like Mike North on the Mike North Advantage. He offers gambling advice, and so he talks with gamblers all the time. This has been one of the toughest years ever to bet on football games, and for fantasy football, it's been a challenge too.
It sure has, and you definitely got to flex your fantasy muscles this year. And as the Gaines report said, who thankfully helped fill in on Sunday for the Tooch, he said he's been watching our show all year, and that's what's helping him get through it all. So, keep tuning into us, and we're going to help you the best we can. And hopefully let you ride that train straight to a championship and definitely into the playoffs. I know that's what Aldo's hoping for, right?
Oh, man, it would be nice to get back into the playoffs. My second year back after a long absence, it would be really nice. But there's some good players. I'm in a division with Danny Shimon, who is the co-host of Draft on Tap, and so he does his homework. And he beat me this past week for the second time this year. And he's not hesitant at all to trash talk, which is one of the reasons I love fantasy football. But I got to bone up on my trash talking a little bit. It helps to be able to trash talk when you win. When you lose, you can't get away with much trash.
Not much to say, yeah.
Exactly.
But Danny won't budge, man. I tried to get him to trade 3-4 times, and nope. He's like, I like my team. He's like a GM, a true GM. No doubt about it.
He's a good player, no doubt about it.
And if you guys haven't watched Draft on Tap when it's on, make sure you tune in. So much great draft analysis between Danny Shimon and Neil Stopchinski. And of course, Aldo, behind the boards.
Actually, I've got an expanded role this year because Draft on Tap, what we're doing this year is I'm playing the role of the general manager, and Neil Stopchinski and Danny Shimon are the scouts. And so I'm asking them to go out and scout, certain positions that that the Bears need. So they've scouted quarterbacks, they've scouted offensive linemen, they've scouted edge players. And in tomorrow's show, we've got the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl, Jim Nagy, no relation to Matt Nagy, but Jim is the guy that extends all these invitations to seniors down for the Senior Bowl. So we're going to get a really great look at the senior players who are going to be in the 2021 NFL draft. He's going to provide analysis of all these players. So that is going to be an awesome, awesome show.
Don't miss that. That's going to be awesome, guys. Check it out tomorrow. And maybe the future fantasy players, we can hear a little bit about those up and coming seniors. Excited for that next year. Oh, we got a question from Barrelissimo here. Dave, I've got David Carr and Kyler Murray. Who should I go with, or do I need to waiver wire? Well, I do not think you need to waiver wire, Barrelissimo. Kyler Murray has been pretty much a must-start most of the year. Last week was really his first dud of the season, but I like David Carr. I keep calling him Derrick in usual shows. David Carr. Because how can you be wrong with him going against the Jets? I mean, any fantasy quarterback going against the Jets, you really got to go with them. So I like what I see out of Carr. I don't like what I saw out of Kyler Murray last week. His shoulder looks as banged up as it probably is, and he really couldn't get much done against the Patriots. So I think he might need a week or two to shake that off. So I like David Carr this week. I think they're going to throw all over the Jets. I think you're good, Barrelissimo. I would stay put, my friend.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I would add that one of the things we're going to talk about later in the show is playoff schedules for fantasy football teams. And so one of the things that I've discovered, because I have Kyler Murray on my team, is that Kyler has a really tough schedule for those traditional fantasy football playoffs weeks. And so what I've done is I've looked at the schedules for week 14, 15, and 16. And Kyler has probably, and we'll show it a little later in the show, but I think he's got the toughest schedule for quarterbacks. So Derek Carr has probably one of the better ones. So we're in good shape there with having probably, you might actually consider moving Derek to your number one quarterback for the rest of the season. Again, it's all based on matchups, but Carr might from week to week to week have better matchups than Kyler Murray.
Yeah, it could absolutely happen. And let's be honest, Derek Carr has outperformed what I thought he was going to do this season, and he's been a great fill-in. And with that schedule, he could easily fall into a top 10 QB role, if the cards fall the right way. Obviously, they have a great running game, but John Gruden likes to throw it. So I like David Carr. It's a great question, Barrelissimo. Appreciate you tossing that in here. And although I'd say, what do you say we talk through some of the fantasy injuries going on? Because there's been a handful.
Yeah.
They're starting to kind of get corralled. It feels like there's more people on the COVID list than anything right now. But in terms of injuries, well, I guess this is COVID list, the first name on this list. The Ravens played today. Lamar Jackson still on that COVID list. He's week to week, so you don't know when you're going to get him back, but it's not like he was doing too much in fantasy anyway.
Yeah, how disappointed are you in his play? I mean, so many people drafted him in the first round or early second round, expecting him to have a continuation of his 2019 season, but it hasn't happened. I haven't looked over the last couple of weeks of what his fantasy numbers are overall for quarterbacks, but it has to be disappointing for those people who drafted Lamar early on.
It's got to be, because, I mean, he was going in the first round in the majority of leagues. And if you wasted a first rounder on a quarterback that is getting about 18 to 22 points a game, you could get guys doing a lot better than that in the 8th, 9th, even into the 10th round. I mean, a guy like, I don't know, let's see, Matt Ryan went super late in drafts. I mean, literally anybody, Tom Brady, Jared Goff, these are guys that are doing better than Lamar Jackson as a first round pick.
Amazing.
So it cements the theory that we've been talking about on the show for the last 3 years. Do not draft a quarterback in the first 3 rounds. Just don't do it.
Yep. The very first year I played fantasy football, I drafted Steve Young, quarterback of the 49ers. That's how long ago that was. And he had an injury-riddled season, and for the first 3-4 weeks, I lost every game because he just wasn't playing a good quarterback position. And I had an opportunity to pick up a guy named Kurt Warner.
And his that worked out all right.
Well, but I didn't. Somebody was advising me, I want you to take a shot at this Kurt Warner guy. And I was like, Kurt Warner? The guy was bagging groceries. No way I'm going to pick him on my fantasy football team. I forgot who I ended up picking, but if I would have picked Kurt Warner, because I already had Marshall Faulk, I picked him in round 2. If I would have picked up Kurt Warner, I would have won the fantasy football championship in my first year. That would have been given me an outstanding team. So you just never know sometimes, but I'm with you, man. Drafting a quarterback in round 1 is a no-no. I have not done it since.
Yeah. I mean, the only one that seems to be working out is Mahomes. But I mean, again, you missed out on some other top tier talent when you could have got someone, a tier down for him way later on.
Right.
Josh Allen comes to mind as a top 5 fantasy quarterback taken probably in rounds, 7 to 9.
Right.
But getting back to quarterback injuries, Drew Brees still dealing with that shoulder and rib injury. He's going to be out for the next probably 3 weeks. He's on IR. He might be out longer than that, depending on, collapsed lung, ribs, thumb. I mean, this guy's shoulder, he's dealing with every single injury you could think of.
Mm-hmm.
So Drew Brees banged up. That means, strangely enough, Taysom Hill still getting the start. We'll talk about him a little bit later in the show. Tua Tagovailoa, who I can finally pronounce, he's got a thumb injury. He's doubtful again this week. Ryan Fitzpatrick likely to start in his place. Drew Lock and all the Broncos quarterbacks have COVID, and they're going to be questionable for Week 13. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. The fact that Kendall Hinton even came in and made an effort without practicing with the team at all was commendable. But I tried to take a flyer and get a little cutesy with him in the Bears Barroom League, and I ended up losing because I started him as a flex.
Did you?
Santucci beat me by 3 points.
Oh,
no.
I didn't know.
And Hinton gave me -2 points, and the guy I benched in favor would have gotten me 15. So I lost because I got too cute. So don't get too cute, fantasy people. I was trying to be a little too cute and thought I was going to capture lightning in a bottle. It didn't work.
Yeah, I hear you. Although I commend you for taking a shot like that. I expected him to have a better performance, but it didn't work out for him. And it's interesting, that Vic Fangio has thrown those quarterbacks under the bus, rightfully so, in my opinion, saying that they just were disrespectful of the team to expose themselves to potential danger with COVID. And boy, wouldn't it be cool if they just brought back what's the lefty's name again? Who played for the Broncos, was drafted in the first round. Tebow, Tim Tebow. Yeah. They should bring back Tim Tebow and let him play next week.
They're probably having tryouts like in the Replacements movie this week. Like literally, I mean, as long as you're with the follow COVID protocols, you get somebody signed ASAP, they can play. So.
Indeed.
But that's a bizarre situation. Of course, when it comes to the Bears, Nick Foles has got that hip injury. He's week to week, so Trubisky likely to give another go this week. Teddy Bridgewater still dealing with that knee injury, although he's questionable heading into this week.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Matt Stafford, of course, going against the Bears, dealing with a thumb injury. He's probable. He played last week, so I'm sure he'll probably play this week. Excuse me. Jimmy Garoppolo dealing with that ankle. He's expected to return next week. So potential guy you could pick up off waivers that could probably help you a little bit if you're in a bind.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not somebody I would really trust in fantasy playoffs unless you're in a really, really, really deep league. Like I'm in a 16-man league, and that's a nightmare.
Yeah, who you're playing at tight end in that 16-team league? Jeez.
I got lucky. I got Darren Waller, but there's not really anybody else. I took an early pick, but I don't have enough running backs. There's always a weakness.
Yeah.
But I started 0-5, and I'm 5-7 in that league, Aldo.
Nice.
So, Hey, little things.
Yeah.
And then lastly on the quarterback injury list, Gardner Minshew still dealing with that thumb injury. He's questionable for this week, but it looks like they're probably going to go with good old Mike Glennon anyway.
Mm-hmm. How amazing is that? And for all those people that say, wow, these Bears players, they go somewhere else and they play well. Stop it with that. Stop it. That's just not, it's an aberration when these guys go and have a good game. Somebody on our YouTube channel here started speaking glowingly of Nick Kwikkowski, the linebacker. Yes, he's good, but he's not having a better season with the Raiders this season than he had in 2019 with the Chicago Bears. Trey Burton is definitely not having a better year in 2020 than he did in 2018 with the Chicago Bears. In 2019, it was an injury-filled season, whether it was psychological injuries or physical injuries, whatever. So I think that's a myth. That's a wrong narrative that players leave the Chicago Bears and have better careers. It happens once in a while, no doubt about it, but it's not a given.
Yeah, we're starting to see now that it's not necessarily the player. It could be the play calling. There's a million other things that it could be, but that's beside the point.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to running back injuries, there's not quite as many as there were before, but there's still a handful. Christian McCaffrey, the number overall fantasy pick, who's missed more than half the season, which is a killer for fantasy owners, still dealing with a shoulder injury. He's questionable heading into this week. Todd Gurley, he's got that knee injury. He missed this week. Brian Hill filled in admirably.
Mm-hmm.
He's questionable for this week. Alvin Kamara dealing with that foot injury. He's questionable for this week. But, Latavius Murray came in and had a dynamite game last week. Unbelievable. So he's a guy you can start with confidence as well. And then the next guy on this list, Aldo, is a guy that we've been talking about a lot on the show. He's been on IR, and I'm talking about Myles Gaskin from the Dolphins. He was a pleasant surprise for fantasy owners. This is a guy that was a bell cow. He was getting 20, 25 points a game, and then he went down with a knee injury. He's been out for like the last 4 to 5 weeks, but he's questionable, possibly returning off of IR this week. And I actually got a little video clip here, Aldo. Brian Flores had a press conference talking about what Gaskin's role would be when he comes back. So let's take a quick listen to that.
With the running back situation, I know you guys are getting a little healthier. I don't know if Myles is going to come back, but if he does, do you anticipate him resuming his lead back, starting, I don't know what you want to call it, role that he had for much of the season before he got hurt?
I think it would depend on, what he shows in practice. He practiced some last week. Look, when you're out a few weeks, I mean, there's a conditioning element, there's a getting back to it element, there's a physical element. So, the idea a guy can just walk back in and he's the same player he was, before the injury. It normally takes a little, a week, 2 weeks until you're back to, hopefully back to where he was. But we take that into consideration. I hope a guy like Myles, does or could, get right back to form quickly. But I don't think there's any assumptions that it'll be that way. We got some other backs. We normally rotate them. So we'll see. But it all starts in practice. It goes out there in practice as well, and we feel like, all right, he can be the take the majority of the carries like he was prior to the injury, then that could be the case, but we'll see.
Very interesting. I kind of took that as, to me, although when I'm listening to that, I'm like, well, it sounds like Gaskin's coming back this week. I got that much out of it. And they don't really have anyone else that's really that good. It almost sounded like he was trying to throw the scent off. Like, I'm not going to give him all that many carries, kind of brush it off. Myles Gaskin's a guy that if you have him on your team, this could be a guy that could help you win the league. Like, that's how much of a bell cow he is. So that activation right before fantasy playoffs couldn't be any better timing.
Right. Yeah, he said he wants to take a look at how he looks like in practice. There was a portion of the practice that was open to reporters today. They saw Gaskin was wearing a compression sleeve on his left leg, but he was moving around without any noticeable limp or anything like that. I'm with you. I think that the coach is playing coy there. I don't think he's really got a lot of good options. They're fighting for a playoff spot. I think my advice always to fantasy football players is make sure if you've got a guy like Gaskin on your roster, make sure you're trying to follow on social media some of the beat reporters for those teams. They will give you reports on, what they see during practice, what they hear during practice. So you might get a report that Gaskin looked good in practice, and that way you can make a start-sit decision, based on the accumulated information that you get throughout the week. But my gut says is that he's probably going to see several snaps, and that the head coach Flores there was playing a bit coy.
Yeah, and he's not officially even been activated off of IR, so I'm waiting for that move. He's practicing. If he's looking as good as he is, I imagine it's going to happen within the next day or so, because the weekend's coming up quickly. Hopefully he gets activated, because I have him in a lot of leagues. But of course his other counterpart in that backfield is Salvin Ahmad. He missed last week with a shoulder injury. He's questionable for this week. He's pretty banged up. I don't think he's going to go, but, it's always a possibility. Geo Bernard, he was dealing with a concussion. He ended up playing last week, but I'm sure he'll be good to go. He's got that questionable designation. And then I don't know if anyone saw, but Rex Burkhead from the Patriots has a knee injury. He's been placed on IR. He's out for the year. So that puts that a little less confusion in that Patriots backfield, because we always say on the show, Bill Belichick hates fantasy football, but it gets a little easier to guess now who's going to get the ball. I like James White and I like Damian Harris the rest of the year. Just a couple guys to keep an eye on. Justin Jackson from the Chargers, he missed last week with a knee injury. He's questionable heading into this weekend. Matt Breida, I should have talked about him with the other Dolphins. He's got a hamstring. He's probable heading into this week.
And didn't he have some fumble issues too with the Dolphins? I know that.
Yeah, he's been horrible. So
yeah.
I mean, he's a potential cut for that team, really. If they want to get some other pieces, I'm sure somebody else would pick him up in a heartbeat, though.
Well, and to me, it just justifies the gut feel that I have that. Hey, I don't care how Gaskin looks in practice, man. You don't want to go with Matt Breida, who's giving you some fumbling issues. You don't want to go with other guys who are, less than 100% healthy. Perhaps a 90% Gaskin is much better than any of the other backs on that squad.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting scenario, that's for sure. Damian Harris from the Patriots, who I was just talking about, he's got an ankle and chest injury. He's probable heading into this week. And then Tevin Coleman has got a knee injury for the Niners. He's questionable. Might play this weekend. We'll have to wait and see. And we got a question in the chat that I will address while it's here. Newport 100's asking if I ever addressed the first COVID postponement, because we did tell people last week we didn't say to pull. We said you should take precautions in case this game isn't played, because I didn't want to take the risk of having any players not on my roster because of a game that's got moved to another week. So while we're sorry that you lost your week because of it, I stand by the sentiment of a game that got delayed as much as this one did. Obviously, if you had any players in this game, there wasn't a whole lot of fantasy action anyway. The defenses did pretty well, but aside from that, it wasn't a huge day in fantasy. But I echo the sentiment, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. If I all my leagues that I have Steelers, I left them on the bench. I just didn't want to risk it with such an important week going into playoffs. And if I would have not had those points, it would have been an automatic loss. So it worked out, though. I picked up who the heck did I pick up on defense? I picked up the Seahawks defense the other day, and they had all those interceptions. So, it worked out. But I apologize, Newport. We're not perfect, but we aim to be every single week. Just get back at them next week. We're here to help you along the way.
There you go. So we're moving to wide receiver injuries now. We got Kenny Galladay, the Detroit Lions wide receiver. He's got a hip and questionable, and that could be, speaking as a Bears fan, that could be huge because the matchup of Galladay against it will probably be Jennings, and Galladay did not play in week 1, if I recall correctly. He was injured for that game too, so it would be
banged up a lot this year.
Yeah, and he's a special wide receiver. He really is, and I think a lot of the problems that the Lions have had with their offense has been his unavailability. What do you know about Michael Thomas?
Well, he's been dealing with that ankle injury on and off all year long. He seems to be playing through it now at this point. So I would be shocked if he didn't play in this game. So he's trending in the right direction, although I think Michael Thomas will continue to play. And Taysom Hill's got a great matchup, which, spoiler alert, we'll be talking about him in just a little bit.
Michael Adam Humphries has a concussion. I think I saw a replay of that concussion. I'm not sure, I'm surprised that he's questionable and not more like doubtful, but we'll keep an eye on that.
Well, he's missed 4 straight games. He has the designation of questionable right now, but I mean, obviously, if you miss that many games, there's 3 or 4 games, something like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was a really nasty hit. So I don't know if we're going to see Adam Humphries at all, but maybe he comes back. I think he's going to be really, really sloppy when he comes back, if at all. He's a name that I would probably avoid when he comes back, but still
Mhm.
dealing with that concussion. A long way to go for him.
Who else you got on your list?
AJ Brown has been dealing with that ankle injury. He's questionable heading into this week. I'm sure he'll probably give it a go. He played last week. The big name that I've been watching a lot is Sterling Shepard. He's been dealing with all kinds of stuff. A hip, a toe. He's questionable heading into this week. He's got a great matchup. I think he's probably going to play. The Giants are in must-win territory right now.
Mhm.
I think they're going to win that division because they're finally starting to put together the pieces. So keep an eye on Sterling Shepard. Currently questionable, but I think he's going to play. Julio Jones, I'm not so confident on, although here's a guy who got ruled out pretty much last minute last week and kind of sent fantasy owners into a scramble. I was actually on the air with Gaines, and we got the note, and Gaines is like, oh, man, I got to go change my lineup right now. Hang on 1 second. Shout out to Gaines, who's in the chat as well, man. Appreciate you as
My
always.
man, Tyler Gaines.
And, Julio, I'm not completely confident. Hamstring injuries are really tricky when it comes to fantasy.
They really are.
Especially with Julio.
Mhm.
Julio, he's hit or miss. That team's pretty much out of contention at this point. So they'll probably hold him back if there's any questions. John Brown, on the other hand, he's been dealing with an ankle in and out the last couple weeks. He's not a guy you're probably going to start anyway, only in deeper leagues, but he'll be questionable. And then DJ Chark for the Jaguars. He's got that rib injury. He missed last week, but he is practicing now and looking like he's going to be probable heading into this week. DJ Chark, a big shot in the arm for fantasy owners, and that's going to help Mike Glennon, which I never thought I'd say out loud again, heading into this week. So DJ Chark could help you out, although I don't know how often Glennon's going to throw him the ball, but that's a whole nother thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, in the wide receiver territory is a guy who's been on this list the entire season. And that's Deshaun Jackson. He's got that ankle injury. He's expected to be back week 15. And at that point, you might as well, just call the season over. Yeah. But the Eagles are in it, but they're not in it, which is really strange. That team can't put it together. And that because of that, I don't want to touch Deshaun Jackson with a 10-foot pole, although.
Yeah, there's, all sorts of problems with that team. And when you have problems in the offensive line, it's hard to rely on your skill players, especially the wide receiver guys and guys like Deshaun Jackson, who, typically are guys that they're not possession receivers, they're deep threats. And if the offensive line is not providing any protection for the quarterback, then it's going to be very difficult to get the ball to them. And then when you got a guy who has been injured throughout the season, you just don't want to count on him. So he shouldn't be on any of your boards, waiver wire pickups, what have you. Just move on.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll hit the tight end injuries. There's only 2. And then we got a couple questions in the chat. So a tight end, there's not a whole lot of injuries, which is great for fantasy owners. Irv Smith from the Vikings, he's got a groin injury. He's questionable heading into this weekend. And then Zach Ertz, he's been out for the Eagles for the last 3 weeks, I think. Dallas Goedert stepped in really well, and he's put up quite a bit of points. But Ertz dealing with that ankle, he's questionable. He might be back this weekend. But I still like Dallas Goedert even with Ertz back because the Eagles don't really have anyone to throw to.
Yeah, Dallas is a guy I cut early in the season. I was loaded with tight ends and was in need of some other position players. And so I started kind of weaning off some of the tight ends. And looking back, even though I got Waller as my number 1 tight end, it would have been nice for me to hang on to Dallas. You can't, particularly this season, you and I were talking about it before the start of the show, is the tight end play overall in the NFL this season for fantasy football. It's been tough to find productive players. And so, if that, it's kind of my strategy is if you've got a weak position, then you kind of load up on those guys on your bench and then, try to play the best matchups throughout the season. That's what I should have done. But nonetheless, I'm doing okay with my Raiders tight end.
Yeah, I would say so. I think Darren Waller's doing all right.
Mm-hmm.
We got a couple great questions here in the chat. We got one from Chris Gonzalez from a little while back, but it's a great question. He's asking, what are my thoughts on the hindsight? I'm sorry, what's your hindsight with Hines and Taylor? Well, the Colts backfield's a bit of a mess, although, and I've been trying to make sense out of it for the last 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So you got Jonathan Taylor, who weeks ago was great, and then he's kind of fallen off. You got Jordan Wilkins, who's starting to out-carry Jonathan Taylor. And then you have Nyheim Hines, who's the backfield equivalent of like a wide receiver who's just kind of making more plays than the other two. So right now, the best fantasy value you can get is with Hines on that team because he's catching those balls out of the backfield. We all know that Phillip Rivers loves to chuck little doink passes left and right to his running back. And, I love Taylor, but he's not getting the volume. So right now, between Taylor and Wilkins, they're both running back threes, essentially, basically kind of fall into a flex spot. But I like Hines as a running back too, just because, well, in PPR leagues, I like him as an RB2 because he's catching a lot of balls. He's getting a couple carries. Phillip Rivers likes him, and that's what's important. So hindsight is Nyheim Hines is the guy you want right now.
Yeah. Well, and Taylor was on the COVID-19 list last week, wasn't he? And so let me see what I can find here. Colts have announced Jonathan Taylor has been activated off the COVID-19 injured reserve list for week 13.
Yeah.
He is not tested positive for COVID-19. So there's some news that I wasn't aware of.
Yep. So, I mean, he's been up and down, throughout the year. Hines has been the most consistent, and that's kind of why I lean towards him.
Yeah. Good call.
Yep. And then we just got a question. Well, we got a couple questions here. We got one from Mark Henrique. What do you think of rolling out both Thielen and Jefferson in a good matchup? Or am I capping my upside? McLaurin and Ridley are my others. I got to sit one. I would not roll with both of those guys because the quarterback is Kirk Cousins. In this case, I mean, Thielen just got activated off the COVID list, so he's going to play this week. I think you got to roll with Thielen. Jeez, that is tough. Both those guys have good matchups. Terry McLaurin has been a PPR machine. Mark, if your league is a PPR league, I like Thielen and McLaurin here because they're just getting targets left and right.
I'm with you there. I totally agree with you. McLaurin has been on my roster. He's a guy that I saw down at the Senior Bowl. Danny Shimon and I interviewed him. We talked to him about the possibility of him coming to the Chicago Bears. He said he had great meetings with them. He met with them twice. We were disappointed when he wasn't drafted. And that disappointment has borne out because he had an excellent rookie season with the Washington football team. He's having a great follow-up season. And I've had him on my fantasy football team the last 2 years, and he has just not let me down. He's one of those guys that almost whatever the matchup, I'm going to put him in because there is nobody else on that team to throw the ball to. And so, like you said, Joe, from a PPR standpoint, he's going to get you some points. And so sometimes you want to go with the tried and true, and so he's a kind of a reliable guy.
I'm with you. And that is a tough one, Mark, but I think you gotta go that route. Mm-hmm. It'll help you out. Hopefully, you have a great lineup, man. Great job drafting. So if I only sit one of the four, it's Jefferson, right? Yeah, I would sit. I hate sitting Jefferson, but your team is so good. I think you got to.
Mm-hmm. And what does David Earl have for us? What's up with Smith? Why is he questionable? And this past week, he had 0 fantasy points. Didn't he suffer an injury this past week?
Yeah, he's been banged up. I think I neglected to put him on the injury list, but Ganu's been playing through whatever injuries he has. I mean, last week the offense just wasn't there. He didn't practice though today, which is surprising. Mm-hmm. He's dealing with a knee injury, which has been on and off throughout the course of the season. But if he returns to practice tomorrow, or I'm assuming if he practices tomorrow, he should be good to go against the Browns. But Jonnu's a guy that it's kind of hit or miss in that offense because if they lean on Henry a lot, they kind of forget about Jonnu Smith. And last week was a Derrick Henry game.
All right.
I'm not too concerned because, like we said, tight end is absolutely horrible in the league. I think as long as Jonnu plays against the Browns, he's a good matchup because they're not great against the tight end. But just keep an eye on his designation. If he doesn't practice tomorrow, then you got something to worry about. So keep an eye on Jonnu Smith. And if he doesn't play, then you can look at a guy like Jordan Reed from the 49ers, who's been doing surprisingly well for a lot of people.
Yeah, my gut tells me that I'm just skeptical about Smith, and that even if he does play, probably he's not going to see a lot of targets. So if you've got better options there, I would look elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got one more before we get to fantasy playoff strategy. What's up with the Kansas City running back? He's talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'm drunk and I can't pronounce his name. He's a victim of being on an offense that's really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been chucking the ball like crazy. I mean, I think that's really it. I mean, you've got Le'Veon Bell. You've got CEH for short. That's a little easier to remember, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But I think it's just he's going to be a guy that's going to ride the waves. He could be great one week. He could be terrible the next. I just think he's a matchup reliant guy. So if you're going against a you're going against a defense that's bad against the run, fire him up. But if it's a defense that's bad against the pass, Mahomes is going to light him up. So I think it's simply just a victim of the kind of offense that he's in. I mean, it's the same reason Le'Veon Bell has been fantasy garbage since he joined, so,
right.
Just you got to deal with the offense that you're on.
Right. I'm with you there. He's on my roster. I drafted him actually late in the first round in our league. And in the very first game of the season, he had outstanding numbers, but he had a number of red zone attempts for touchdown. And he couldn't get it in. So he kind of proved right away that he isn't the power back, although he's had, I think, 1 or 2 red zone touchdowns in the last several weeks, but he's just not as reliable in terms of scoring from that power back position. So he doesn't see as many snaps as he did earlier in the season. And since Le'Veon Bell joined the team, like Joe said, his snaps have been reduced even more. So he is a nightmare. He is a matchup watch. You got to look at who they're playing every week and then make that careful decision on whether you start him or sit him, because even though he is a first round pick for me, I'm now in that position where I've got to be very careful when I start him. And I've been working at trying to build some depth with my running back so I can have some options, because he's got some tough matchups coming up, especially in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, he really does. And I don't know. He's one of those guys that might end up being a first round bust, but he's scoring points compared to like a Christian McCaffrey who's injured on the bench, or Saquon Barkley, but that's beside the point. But Aldo, what do you say we talk a little bit about playoffs and strength of schedule?
Yeah, let's do that. Now, to set this up, I want to say that in my prime years of playing fantasy football, what I would do prior to the trade deadline, I would look at my roster and start to determine which players are going to have tough fantasy playoff matchups. And so that way I would then try to unload them. So the kid that we were just talking about from the Kansas City Chiefs, I would have started to dangle him around week 5, week 6, and so forth. And I actually got some trade offers that I should have taken more seriously, because if I would have done my homework earlier, I would have seen that Kansas City for running backs is going to have some tough matchups coming into the fantasy football playoffs. But now that the trades are off, let's move past that. And so now what you've got to do is, if you're in position to make the playoffs, and what I've used is the weeks 14, 15, 16 for this exercise, you start to kind of now ascertain, or which teams are going to have good matchups and bad matchups based on positions. And so what I implore all of you fantasy football players to do is to do your own research on this. But what I'm going to provide you here and Joe and I are going to provide you here with some kind of guidelines of what we've done with this initial research. So fantasy football playoffs, best schedules for quarterbacks. Right now, you've got the Bucks, Rams, Chargers, Packers, and the Washington football team as the top 5 teams based on my research that have really good playoffs matchups. And so if you've got Tom Brady, you're probably you're playing him every week anyway. If you've got Jared Goff, you've probably been playing him some weeks and not some weeks, you can kind of rest assured that for those 3 weeks of the fantasy football players, he's going to have some favorable matchups. The young quarterback for the Chargers, favorable matchups. Of course, Aaron Rodgers, you start him even if he shows up with his right arm in a sling. You're gonna start him, but you're gonna feel even better starting him knowing that he's gonna have some favorable matchups. The last 3 weeks, though, the one thing about him is that if your playoffs are on week 17, he may not even play in week 17. They might be resting him, but I don't know how you feel, Joe. Do you like playing in leagues where your fantasy playoffs extend into week 17?
No, absolutely not. All my leagues that I commission, all the leagues end in week 16 because you got too many guys sitting because of playoffs in week 17. You just can't have a respectable league that has a week 17 playoff. You just can't.
Right. And then the fifth team on my list here is the Washington football team. So if you have Alex Smith available in waivers, and some leagues do, you might want to consider picking him up and stashing him. So therefore, if your number one quarterback gets hurt or you're having a bad matchup with your quarterback during the fantasy football players, it's very likely that Alex Smith is going to have a good matchup. And so that would give you a choice to look at. What has your survey said, Joe? You got similar teams schedule-wise for best playoff matchups for quarterback?
Yeah, so I mean, I got pretty much all the same teams on there with the addition of the Ravens. Even though I don't love Lamar Jackson, I was just talking about him. I do like his schedule because he's got the Cowboys, the Browns, Jaguars, and the Giants.
Right.
So I mean, I think that's a great matchup you can fly with. Hang on, I got it right. I got my research right in front of me here too. You know, another team that's surprisingly good, which no one's going to trust them, but is the Cowboys with Andy Dalton. You get Cincinnati, San Francisco, and Philadelphia, so that's pretty good. And then another one here is the Cleveland Browns with Baker Mayfield. So you get Baltimore, the Giants, and the New York Jets. So there's just a couple other quarterbacks that could definitely help you out down the stretch, especially if you're dealing with an injury.
Then worst schedules for quarterbacks. Here are the 5 teams that I came up with: the Texans with Deshaun Watson, the Bills, the Vikings, the Cardinals, and the Bengals. And so when I saw this on my research, I had a mini panic attack because I got Kyler Murray. He's been my number one quarterback all season, and I've been I don't even have a backup quarterback right now because I said, hey, I'm going to ride with Kyler the rest of the way, and so I can use some of my bench spots for instance, I've gone with 3 defenses the last 2 weeks because I wanted to have matchups, and I wanted to have. I took a look ahead and said, well, in week 11, this team has a good matchup, so I'll pick up that defensive team for that matchup, and then I'll pick up this defensive team for week 12 matchup. So I had 3 defenses. Now I got to start hunting for a good quarterback in case I want to make that tough decision to sit Kyler Murray during a tough fantasy football playoff matchup. Is that something that you tend to do too, Joe? I mean, you got 16 teams, so you probably do it with some of your leagues, right?
Yeah, I got to do it in all of them. You really got to look at matchups. You got to plot out how your playoffs are gonna be. And I got one more team to add to that list, although of bad schedules, and I'm talking about the Patriots. Cam Newton gets to go against the Rams, the Dolphins, and the Buffalo Bills. All teams that are good against the run and decent against the pass. And Cam's been doing more running than anything right now. So I kind of sleep on, well, I don't want to sleep on him, but I think Cam's going to have a bad end of his season.
I'm with you there. You know, one of the reasons that I was not keen on Cam Newton, despite, he's a tremendous athlete and so forth, he's just taken so much punishment over the years. And so I didn't really have him on my draft board because I figured he probably will get off to a good start, and he did. But he's going to regress as the season goes on because, his style of play, there's just so much punishment that he takes. And so he's a guy I respect him a lot, but I just don't want him on my team because I just don't think he's got the longevity. He's taken so much punishment. Let's look at running backs' best playoff schedules. Again, this is from weeks 14, 15, and 16. You got the Titans, Packers, Bears with David Montgomery, the Lions, Bucks. Extended that to go all the way to top 10 teams. Ravens, Broncos, Dolphins, Colts, and Bengals all have good matchups during the fantasy football playoffs.
Yeah, no, they really do. And, you know, there's a lot of fantasy names out there that are really going to help you when it comes to the playoffs at running back. But I don't know if anyone's going to help you more than Aaron Jones. I mean, this guy and if you sleep under a rock, I mean, he's from the Packers, him and Jamal Williams, both these guys are probably going to help you, but he get to Detroit, Carolina, and Tennessee. I mean, that's what you want going into the fantasy playoffs. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. The only person that's got a better schedule is our own hometown boy, David Montgomery. And as you mentioned, Aldo, listen to the Bears schedule during the playoffs. I mean, this is unreal. Houston, Minnesota, Jacksonville. I mean, you got to be licking your chops just thinking about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, a lot of times what I will do as well is, let's say I don't have David Montgomery. So I'll look at, you know, who is the backup to David Montgomery in case Montgomery misses a game. Now, Montgomery is a bad example because the Bears are not a running team. So I would, probably not focus so much on the Bears, but typically, let's say the Bears were a team that would commit their number one running back to 50 to 20 touches per game, then I would look at who is the backup running back to David Montgomery. And if I've got an open spot in my bench, I might draft him and stash him away for those playoff months, knowing the playoff weeks, knowing that, if Montgomery goes down, then, Lamar Miller or Artavius Pierce might be the backup. Again, that's not the best example. You know, maybe the Colts with their schedule is a better example. You look at a Jonathan Taylor or the guy that you like a lot. So, you gotta look at it from all sorts of different angles, do some homework and so forth. Now, moving on to fantasy playoffs, worst schedules for running backs. It's the Chiefs, the Vikings, the Dallas Cowboys, the Bills, and the Eagles. Now, with Dalvin Cook, I think you start him whoever he's playing, right?
You have to. You can't bench Dalvin Cook. I mean, he's just so good.
Right. But with the Chiefs, them having, this running back by committee and then playing some tough defenses and having such a prolific passing offense, it's going to be really, really tough for me to feel confident about playing my guy, Clyde, in these matchups. So I'm looking for backup running backs to supplement my roster with. Dallas Cowboys, with that torn up offensive line that they have, Ezekiel Elliott might be a tough play in the coming weeks. And Bills and Eagles got some tough matchups as well. I got a lot of players from these 5 teams, so I'm in trouble.
I know, so do I. The only player that I'm not worried about, although with a bad playoff schedule, is James Robinson from the Jaguars. And as we've seen week after week, he is just a bell cow back that's getting it done. I actually have his stat line from let's see. I have a stat line from last week. He went 22 carries for 128 yards, 5 catches for 31 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, this guy is just getting it done every single week. But he's got a tough playoff schedule. He's got Tennessee, Baltimore, and the Bears. Yeah. But I'm still going to start him because he is that team. He's going to catch 5 balls, 6 balls, no matter what, and he's going to get probably 15 to 20 carries. You can't bench a guy like that.
No, you can't do it. You can't do it. Now the only way you bench him is if you are just loaded, and you've got that kind of luxury of saying, well, I've got a comparable back on my bench, but he's got a better matchup. Then of course, and that becomes a no-brainer. But yeah, there are certain players you got to ride the hot hand, you got to ride the superstars. And now Ezekiel Elliott is a superstar running back, but I feel less confident about riding a guy like that simply because of the problems they have at quarterback, the problems they have with the offensive line. It's a very defective offense right now, and Zeke is a sensational back. There's no doubt about it. But if I've got better options on my bench, you might see me bench an Ezekiel Elliott for a guy like a David Montgomery who has better matchups.
Absolutely, man.
All right, let's take a look at the wide receivers' best schedules. You got the Rams, Bucks, that Washington football team with my guy McLaurin, the Jets, the Bears, Bengals, Ravens, Eagles, Chiefs, and Lions. Those are my top 10 guys. You got any additional teams that you like on those playoff weeks from a wide receiver standpoint?
I mean, you kind of nailed them all, but the team that I'm really looking at is the Bengals. I know that they're banged up at quarterback, but I mean, you've got Dallas, Pittsburgh, and Houston during your playoffs. So a guy like Tyler Boyd or even T. Higgins, these are guys that are really going to help you. And a lot of people are going to sleep on them. But with that schedule, man, you got to be licking your chops. Another team that I've been looking at, and, a lot of people don't feel so good about them, but I feel good about the Tampa Bay Bucks. I know you have them on this list, Aldo. But, between Evans, Godwin, and Brown, that team gets Minnesota, Atlanta, and Detroit. Yeah. It doesn't get any better than that. So you're going to fire up every Buccaneer you have on your team.
How about that? I love this part of fantasy football, the strategizing and looking ahead and so forth. This to me is part of the big fun. Obviously the draft is the most fun, and the trash talking, and then, managing your team with waiver pickups and so forth, but also kind of looking ahead and plotting strategy and looking at the best matchups and stuff for me is a big part of the fun. Here are some of the worst schedules from a wide receiver standpoint. It's the Panthers, Texans, Patriots, Seahawks, and Jaguars. And I should say that I've looked at a number of different sources to help me with this. Fantasy Football Toolbox was one of the sites. And so again, I urge all of the people watching this show, all of you fantasy football players, go to fantasyfootballgoon.com, Google strength of schedule, and get as much information as you can before you make the decisions, and work that waiver wire, man. Take a long look at that waiver wire, and if there's some garbage that you've got on your bench, get rid of it and load up on some of these teams that have good schedules, and be wary about some of the teams that don't have a good schedule. Plan ahead is my message for you guys.
Absolutely. You got to play ahead. You got to plan ahead. And like Aldo said, these teams have horrendous schedules. The Carolina Panthers, I mean, you get Denver, Green Bay, and Washington, which, for the type of team they are, those are the exact teams you don't want to face off against.
Right. Now, here's another interesting point, regarding this, that you should factor into your thinking. So you see number 4 on this list is the Seahawks. Well, DK Metcalf is a tough sit for me, particularly you got to factor in also that the Seahawks have a putrid defense. Their defense, although I guess the last couple of weeks they've had some good games, but nonetheless, if you look at you've got to factor in, if they have a bad defense, then they're going to be forced into shootouts, and then therefore you want a guy like DK Metcalf, even though he has a tough matchup. So weigh it with who the other players are on your roster, who might be available as a waiver fantasy pick. I'm not saying sit DK Metcalf. I'm not saying that, but if you've got better options, and look at who the Seahawks are against and who their defense has to play against, keep all those considerations going in. Absolutely. All right, want to turn to the tight end position?
Real quick, I wanted to touch on the Houston Texans, because we didn't mention this at the top of the show, but Will Fuller was suspended for the remainder of the season because of a PED violation. So because of that, the Texans really have Brandon Cooks and Kiki Kute as their wide receivers. So because of that, I think I would elevate them to having the toughest schedule now, because they don't have a guy like Will Fuller. If you need a wide receiver flyer, Kiki Kute is the guy that's available in a lot of leagues, and he's going to be a wide receiver too. Even with that tough schedule, he could be someone to help you down the pipe. I don't love Houston the rest of the way because Watson's been running for his life the whole season.
Mhm.
but just someone that could help you out. But they got tough sledding for the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, and I'm trying not to swear on this show, but a big F you to Will Fuller, who I sit him this past week, and he has this tremendous game. And if I would have started him this past week, I would have won my game against Danny Shimon, but I didn't. And all season long, it seemed like when I did play him, he would have a good game, and when I didn't play him, I had a good.
Absolutely.
Let's talk tight ends here. Jaguars, Broncos, Vikings, Falcons, Seahawks, Texans, Steelers, Browns, Ravens, and Saints. Based on my research, these teams have good schedules for the fantasy football playoffs that go weeks 14, 15, and 16. What do you think about that list there, Joe?
I like it. I agree with the fact that the Jaguars have a great schedule, but they have Tyler Eifert, who is always injured or very inconsistent. So I'm taking Tyler Eifert out of consideration. But someone I really do like in the playoffs is a guy that's been slept on all year long, and that's Austin Hooper from the Cleveland Browns. He gets Baltimore, New York Giants, and the Jets. So that's someone that could help you. And I've seen a couple of leagues, Aldo, where people have dropped Austin Hooper. That's definitely someone that can help you along the way.
Yeah, I made the mistake of dropping him, and I should have stashed him on the IR list that you had for us early in the season. He was hurt, and I had a mental block, and it didn't stash him in IR, and I regret that because he's starting to play really, really well now. He'd be a great guy to have moving into the playoffs.
Yeah, and you have the Vikings mentioned on here, Aldo.
Mm-hmm.
Irv Smith is a guy that Tooch and I have been talking about all year long, and I know he's banged up. He's questionable this week, but if he gets back healthy, I like him better than Kyle Rudolph because Irv Smith is a taller, more athletic guy.
Yes.
And they get a great schedule for Minnesota. They get Tampa Bay, the Bears, and New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
All teams that are very mediocre against the tight end. New Orleans is horrible against the tight end. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. And then a guy that's been horrible all season long, although that I've been ragging on, and Mark Andrews from the Ravens. Yes, he's on the COVID list right now, but I imagine he'll be back in the next couple weeks. For fantasy playoffs, Mark Andrews gets Cleveland, Jacksonville, and New York Giants. So I like that as well. So those are just a couple guys that can help you down the stretch.
Great stuff, Joe. All right, and here are the worst schedules for tight ends. Bills, Cardinals, the Washington football team, the Bengals, and those Eagles. Again, this is with the lack of production from the tight end position this season, you got to kind of factor that in. You may not have a lot of choices. Again, look at the opponent that these teams are playing. They might get involved in shootouts and so forth. But this is a tough one here. If you've got if you got Dallas Goedert with the Eagles and Zach Ertz is injured, you might be forced to play him. And even though he might not have a great schedule, a great opponent, it might not be a bad thing. So it's tough. But this is information that you need to factor into your thinking.
Yeah, I mean, Dallas, at this point, tight end is so bad. Like you said, although you're not going to bench a Dallas Goedert, or even if Zach Ertz is playing in those games, you're probably not going to bench him either, just because all the other teams on this list, the only team that's got a decent tight end is really the Washington football team in Logan Thomas, who's been a safety blanket for Alex Smith. And you're still going to start him because he's getting those little checkdowns. He's starting to get more action. But besides that, I'm not starting the tight ends on the other teams on this list.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. All right, good stuff. We got any questions here? Mark says I can't see ever benching DK unless you have all studs. Yeah, I'm with you there, brother.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about it. You just, but again, there are some teams, I look at some of the rosters of other people have built, and I'm like, who are you playing against? You're able to draft so many great players. I envy those teams that are loaded like that. Every year, it seems like I'm looking at a team with great envy.
Yes, sir. And, reminding everybody, get your questions to us in the chat. We're going to answer them before we get off the air. But before we get to all those in mind, starts and sits for the week, we're going to talk through some of the plus matchups.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk a little bit about quarterback plus matchups for the week, Aldo.
Mm-hmm.
Baker Mayfield against the Titans. I mean, I love this matchup this week.
Yeah.
The Browns team, it's finally starting to get going. Baker looks a little bit better than he did at the start of the year. And we all know the Titans secondary is one of the worst in the league.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting that one of the things that I learned in my research is that Baker had not played well when the weather was not good. And last week, he finally, after 2 or 3 weeks of playing in bad weather games, had some good weather and therefore had an outstanding performance. So I went ahead to look at the weather forecast, the anticipated weather forecast in Nashville for this upcoming game, and it's going to be sunny and in the 60s. So you got a good one there with Baker Mayfield against the Tennessee Titans. He should have an excellent performance.
I love it. I love when there's good weather because there's been a lot of bad weather the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Another guy I love, I talked about a little bit earlier, all those Derek Carr going against the Jets. Raiders love to air it out. The Jets are just all-around horrible team. I expect Derek Carr to have a real big day, and he's available in a lot of leagues to help people out.
Yeah, Derek was a guy turning to NFL talk that the Chicago Bears fans were kind of wondering, hey, do you make a pitch for Derek Carr? You try to make a trade for him and so forth. And I was not against that idea because I always thought that Derek Carr was a better quarterback than he had shown in his previous seasons with the Raiders. And boy, this season he has just played at a much higher pace. And if John Gruden had any doubts at all about Derek Carr, I think they're gone. He's probably happy with his quarterback because there were always rumors that he was thinking about getting another quarterback and so forth. And Mike Mayock had said in some of his press conferences, "Hey, we're always looking to improve." It was kind of like, "Oh, that sounds kind of shady." Is he sending Derek Carr a message? Well, if he did, Derek Carr got it, and he's been playing really good football.
He definitely got the message, that's for sure. Another guy on this list, Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's getting a start again for the injured Tua Tagovailoa. I said it wrong that time. That's okay. Going against the Bengals. You get Fitzmagic against the Bengals.
How about it?
That Bengals team is horrible on the ground, and they're horrible in the secondary. Love the Fitzmagic to rekindle the magic this weekend, Aldo.
Yeah, I got to tell you that Fitzpatrick is one of my favorite players in the NFL. This guy has gone from team to team to team. He always seems to provide some kind of a spark. He's played like a number one quarterback many, many times. He turns around and have a bad game here and there. But for the most part, this is a guy that he's going to look back at his NFL career, I think, with a lot of great pride. And from a fantasy standpoint, he's the kind of guy that you can plug in there and he can give you some excellent performances. So a good guy that you've picked on your list here. He's definitely a plus matchup this week.
No doubt. And another guy that people probably going to hate on me for including on this list, but I love him. Taysom Hill going against the Falcons. He filled in when a lot of people thought Jameis Winston should start. But he's had a couple of good games. I mean, he uses his legs a lot. He's going to rush for probably 50 to 80 yards probably. He's probably going to throw two, maybe 3 touchdowns. I love this matchup. The Falcons are horrible. They can't stop the run or the pass. So it's a perfect combination for Taysom Hill to have a big day.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the guy that you could probably go out and get in majority of leagues right now.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, you can't start him as a tight end anymore, like ESPN and a couple of leagues had his first week out. But I like him as a quarterback one, and he could be a good. If you're in a 2 QB league, I love him as a second quarterback. I have him as a second quarterback in my crazy 16-man league, and I think I might give him a whirl this week. So
yeah, for sure, you should. Hill is the type of guy that you kind of see his confidence growing almost from snap to snap. I love the fact that you have him on your list here because I really do think that he could boast some really super numbers this week. He's a guy that, I frankly didn't have a lot of high hopes that he was going to do much, but I'm starting to see something really special in this guy. He's not a guy that from an NFL standpoint that you should, think that he's your long-term solution at quarterback. But from a fantasy perspective, this guy's got the possibility of delivering some baffle numbers. And from week to week to week. You're seeing some progression here. I like your pick here. And then, of course, your next pick, Mr. Aaron Rodgers. Did you purposely misspell this? Because I copied and pasted it onto the line here. Did you purposely say Aaron Rodgers?
No, that was just a straight typo. But I kind of like Aaron Rodgers better than Rodgers.
Me too. I kind of would like it if he would hurry up and retire. But he's talking about, a lot of people were counting me out for this season. I think that was a shot at the Green Bay Packers organization. But he's playing some splendid football. And while I hate the Green Bay Packers, I have to admit that guy is a Baryshnikov when it comes to quarterbacking. He's just got all the tools to be a great guy. A great quarterback, and he delivers week to week to week, and he doesn't turn over the ball much, and he's got a great matchup against the Eagles this week. So another great pick here. I loved your 5+ matchups here, Joe.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And before we get to running back matchups, we got a question from No Name. Should I use my number one waiver on either Kittle or Ebron? I have Fant in standard scoring, and I will make the playoffs. Absolutely. I think you use your waiver claim to pick up George Kittle because he could come back as soon as next week.
Yeah.
He's been on IR, but he's been wanting to come back. He's a guy that wants to get on the field even if he's hurt. And if he does come back, this is a guy that's going to catch 6 to 8 balls a game, maybe more, especially we talked about Garoppolo coming back next week, most likely. This could be a great thing to help you down the road. So take a flyer on him, grab Kittle, because if he comes back, that could help you win your league, man. So I love the question. Thanks for sending that one in. I'm interested to see what happens for you, man. That would be great if you won the league because of that move.
Yeah. Great. Great question. Yeah. I love that advice. And I've also got high hopes for Ebron the rest of the way. I think that he could deliver some numbers too. So if either one of those guys are available, I think that's a good get.
No doubt about it, Aldo. And, let's move on to the plus matchups for running backs. I know we're running a little bit longer, but we've covered a lot of great stuff for fantasy playoffs. So we're giving you guys all you need to kick some butt. But let's talk about the running backs. Of course, you got to mention the Saints running backs, both Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray going up against the Falcons. Can I say more? That defense is horrible. They can't stop the run. And both of these guys are going to catch passes. A lot of people sleeping on Latavius Murray, who had a big game last week. I expect him to have another good game. I don't think he's going to erupt like he did, but I think Latavius Murray is worth starting as a flex. And then going on to the Giants. I love the Giants running backs going against the Seahawks. They can't stop the run. They can't stop the pass. Wayne Gallman has been a secret weapon for me, although I've had him in like 3 of my leagues. This guy's consistently scoring. He's getting close to 90 yards a week. He's been putting up between 15 and 20 points a week as a guy who's filling in. You can't beat that.
Yeah, that was a great pickup on your end there. He was on my radar, and I never pulled the trigger, and I'm upset at myself for not doing so in my league. Live and learn, brother.
That's right. That's the name of the game of fantasy. You live and you learn. And I'm going to take a risk and roll the dice with our hometown Bears. I love David Montgomery going against the Lions. The Lions cleaned house. They fired their coach. They fired their GM this week. That team is going to be desperate, but that doesn't mean they're going to be able to stop the run, Aldo. So Montgomery went off. Montgomery went off against the Packers. I expect him to go off against the Lions.
Yeah, and you know what? I've taken a look at the tape on that game, Bears and Packers, and there was definitely some improved offensive line play. And so hopefully that there's a continuation there. I thought it actually helped the team that Sam Mustipher was playing at center and Cody Whitehair was playing at his more natural position, that left guard position. He was doing a great job of opening up holes for David Montgomery. And so there's a very good chance here that Montgomery could have a second excellent week carrying the rock. When was the last time we've said that about a Chicago Bears running back? Jordan Howard days, right?
Been a hot minute.
Yeah. So if that offensive line continues to play well, David Montgomery can put up some really cool numbers. So that's another great pick on your plus matchups there. And then you've got the Dolphins running backs versus the Bengals. What's your thinking there?
Well, I'm thinking, maybe hopefully thinking that Myles Gaskin returns and can go up against the Bengals, who are just a bad defense in general. They're not at all what they used to be. And Gaskin is a ball hog. I mean, this is a guy that will probably see at least 15 to 20 touches. No matter what Brian Flores says, it sounded to me like he was playing a little coy, but he's got to get activated first off of IR. He's not activated yet. So if you're thinking about starting him, keep an eye on the Dolphins Twitter. Keep an eye on Adam Schefter, guys like that, to keep you in the know. But he's been practicing all week. I'd be shocked if he didn't play. I just love him to go off this week. I'm not starting any of the other backs. If the other guys start, I'm not going to start him. But if Gaskin starts, all right, he gets to go from me.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got the Vikings, huh?
I mean, you can't go wrong against the Jaguars. They've been the worst defense, one of the worst defenses in the league for as long as I can remember. Even with the Jalen Ramsey days, I mean, they were starting to get good, and then he left, and they got bad again. I just love Dalvin Cook. That team can't stop the run. Dalvin Cook's going to go nuts. I imagine Alexander Madison might be in for the fourth quarter because I think they're going to be up that big. You could probably start both of those backs, but I'd much rather go with Dalvin Cook. He might win you your matchup this week. That's how good of a matchup it is.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Alexander Madison because I think he's a guy to keep an eye on. You know, Dalvin Cook has been a workhorse all season. One of the things that I like to do when I'm managing my fantasy football team is that I look at the guys who have carried the ball a lot from the running back position. And I ask myself, well, what's their injury history? You know, is there a possibility that this guy could go down for a game or two or stretch of games and so forth? So who is the backup? Well, in this case, it's Alexander Madison. He actually started for Cook for 2 games earlier this season. And over those 2 games, he had over 30 carries. He had about 5 pass targets and so forth. So he's a guy, you know, that you might want to keep an eye on in case Cook, who had an injury in that, November 30th game and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so he's such a great back and he's been used so much. And, and I anticipate they're going to continue to ride that horse in Dalvin Cook, but you've got to kind of, be concerned about his health. If you've got Cook on your roster, you should definitely handcuff Madison if you can. And if you don't, and if Madison is available in your league, you might want to try to stash him into your roster because he could pay off for you down the line.
Handcuffs definitely important, although it's definitely a great call out heading into fantasy playoffs. Let's move into wide receiver plus matchups. I know we're going a bit long, but we're giving you guys all the knowledge you need for the playoffs, so we're going to hammer through it. Of course, the Vikings, we just got finished talking about them. They have a great matchup for their wide receivers, too, because the Jaguars' secondary is notoriously bad. We mentioned Thielen coming off of COVID list. He's going to play this week. Both Justin Jefferson and Thielen have great matchups. Love them this week. Of course, the Giants wide receivers going against the Seahawks. Seahawks, the worst secondary in football. Not even close. The next nearest team is like 15 yards less or something crazy like that. Sterling Shepard, we talked about. I mean, I love every Giant you can get your hands on in this one. Even Golden Tate is a sneaky play this week. Mm-hmm. I don't got to tell you to start the Chiefs, but they have a great matchup against the Broncos secondary. You're going to fire them up anyway. You don't need me to tell you that. The Packers, of course, we mentioned, great matchup against the Eagles. That means Devontae Adams probably is going to have 4 touchdowns and like 800 yards. He's maybe not quite those numbers, but he's been unreal to say the least. Even a guy like Allen Lazard, who's available in a lot of leagues, he's been targeted heavily, and he's available. Looks like in around 60. He's owned in only about 65% of leagues right now. So Lazard's a guy you can add, and he could help you out, especially this week if you're trying to get in the playoffs. And then last but not least on this list, Aldo, I've got the Dolphins going against the Bengals. Ryan Fitzmagic, throwing to those receivers down there. Devontae Parker should have a big day.
The Bengals have allowed 9 receivers to score at least 12 PPR points over the last 5 games and have given up 8 touchdowns over that span. So you including the Dolphins wide receivers on that list is great advice for fantasy football owners. Great list there, brother. Let's move on to the tight ends.
Let's do it. We're going to close it out with the tight ends. Of course, you got Darren Waller going against the Jets. All those got to have that music blaring in his ears right now. He's all excited. Anytime you get one of the best tight ends in the league going against one of the worst defenses, it's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Waller's not a standard tight end. He's more of a receiver anyway. So love Darren Waller this week. I even have the Colts tight ends on this list, Aldo, because they're going up against the Texans, who are notoriously bad against the tight end and the receiver. Trey Burton, Jack Doyle. I mean, these are guys you're probably not going to start, but Burton's been the most active of them all. As much as it pains me to say, he's been getting more action as of late. I think Trey Burton could be worth a flex play if you're desperate, or even a tight end play this week going against that horrible Texans defense.
I totally agree with you on Trey Burton. He's had a nice connection with Phillip Rivers. Trey Burton's problem has always been health, and staying on the field and so forth. But when he's been on the field with the Colts, just like he was with the Bears, he's fairly productive. And in a year where, you're not seeing as much production out of that tight end position as you'd like, Trey Burton is a good bet for this week. Absolutely. I like that.
I love it. And I'm taking a bet on the 49ers again. Jordan Reed going against the Bills. Defense not very good. Reed has been a serviceable fill-in for George Kittle when he's healthy, which is a big win, but for some reason he's healthy right now. So he could be a great fill-in against the Bills. I love him this week. Same thing with the Saints. Jared Cook going up against the Falcons. Cook has been wildly inconsistent all season long, partially because of the change in quarterbacks, partially because Brees has been kind of running for his life and banged up. But under Taysom Hill, I kind of like Jared Cook this week just because the matchup's so good. He's a big target in the middle of the field. Roll with Cook with confidence this week. And last but not least is a guy that Tooch and I have been talking about the last 4 weeks, is a guy that's going to win you your league, and I stand by that. Hunter Henry and the Chargers going up against the Patriots. While a lot of people sleep on the Patriots, say that they're a great defense and a secondary, they've not been so good against the tight end. And as a whole, the Patriots defense this year has just not been as good as they were last. And then the rest of the way, the Chargers have a really, really nice schedule. And you got Patriots this week, then the Falcons, the Raiders, and the Broncos. Chargers, to me, have probably one of the best schedules the rest of the way. And because of that, Hunter Henry will probably finish as the number 1 or number 2 tight end when all is said and done. Not for the whole season, but over the next 3 weeks. So I love him the rest of the way. So I love Hunter Henry. I love him.
Yeah,
I loved him.
I think you did, and I have to echo your 3 loves of Hunter Henry. It's a great pick, and listening to you guys talk about him over the last several weeks has made me really angry at myself that I didn't search him out. But I do got Waller, so I can't complain too much. Hey, we got a question in the chat. We've got somebody asking about Mark Andrews. Hey, it's our buddy Ron.
Yeah, Ron Rupp now. What's going on, Ron? Do you think Mark Andrews will play? He's in the COVID list. Well, you have to have at least, I think it's 10 days between positive tests. I don't know what the exact league protocol is. I think it's 10 days.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And they have a game on Wednesday. When do they play? They play on Tuesday?
Yeah, I think Tuesday.
So I don't think he would play next week because he was actually diagnosed. He wasn't just put on the list. He was diagnosed as positive. So I don't think he's going to play next week. I don't know. When was he diagnosed, though?
It was 3 days ago.
Okay, so he's got a potential to be able to play. Well, no,
Yeah.
he doesn't.
The issue with him is that he is a type 1 diabetic, and so that puts him at a high risk. And so, there haven't been any late reports. The earliest report that we've got on Andrews has been from like 48 hours. So I think the real news is going to be later this week when we get the official injury report. My gut says right now, I'm not counting on him to play.
I'd be shocked.
Yeah, given his diabetic condition, but I know how valuable he is to a lot of teams. But be cautious with that one, Ron. And every once in a while, go to Google and just type in Mark Andrews and see if you can get some late reports. Go over to Twitter and see what you can find out from some of the beat reporters. Those guys can be the best source of information for fantasy football news because they're there at the practices for every minute that they are allowed in, and they can take a peek to see if a guy's even in uniform or a guy's working out and give you some kind of clue.
Yeah, the league's schedule is really strange next week. I think there's another Tuesday game.
Give it up on it, man. I rely on you to tell me what the schedule is. It's confusing. I forgot. I've been working all day on podcasts, and so I totally forgot to have the TV on in the background for that Ravens-Steelers game because it's Wednesday. Who would think that there's a game on Wednesday? But there was one
Wednesday afternoon. It was like a 2:30 start.
I was telling Mike North when Mike North and I were kids, we used to have World Series and baseball playoff games on in the afternoon. There was no night baseball games for big games. They just didn't think in terms of, television ratings back then. And so we'd have on our transistor radios in class. And Mike made the joke that his sister would whack him with a ruler in his hands, turn off that radio while he's listening to a playoff game. So, it felt like that today when I remembered that there was an afternoon football game in the middle of the week. Pretty funny.
Yeah, it's crazy. And for those wondering with the league schedule this week, there's a bunch of games on Sunday. And you got a doubleheader on Monday night. You got the Steelers and the Washington football team, and then the Bills and the 49ers. And then there's another game on Tuesday, December 8th, a night game this time. It's Cowboys at Ravens. So it's all kinds of weird stuff going on with football schedule right now.
There you go. Wow. That's I should plan my schedule accordingly because I'd like to see some of those games. So,
yeah, right.
All right, you want to move into our starts of the week?
Yeah, let's move into our starts and streams of the week, and then we'll close things out. Man, it's tons of information. This is the show you want to listen to when you're getting ready to for the playoffs. That's for sure. But this week, although at quarterback, my start of the week, I talked about him a little bit earlier. I'm going to go with Taysom Hill against the Falcons. I just love everything about the matchup, the type of quarterback he is, the way the offense is working right now, and the Falcons are lost at sea.
Yeah. And I've got Kirk Cousins. I know how much Kirk Cousins is disliked by many. And yeah, there's one thing about Kirk Cousins, though, is that he can deliver some outstanding performances. So he truly is that kind of matchup guy. And he's facing a Jaguars team that is ranked 30th when they're giving up opponent fantasy points to quarterbacks. The Jaguars have allowed 5 quarterbacks in a row to pass for at least 258 yards and 2 touchdowns in a game. That's 5 straight games where quarterbacks have had over 258 yards and 2 touchdowns. I got a feeling Kirk Cousins is going to even better that. He's got a great matchup, and so if you can get Kirk Cousins into your lineup, unless you have one of the better stellar quarterbacks, he's a good guy to have up there.
I love it, Aldo. I love it. I think Kirk Cousins has a good week, and like you said, he's available in a lot of leagues. He could help you out this week. Moving on to running back. My start of the week at running back, I'm taking a bit of a flyer here, but I like James White against the Chargers, the way they've been using him in that offense. Of course, we mentioned that Rex Burkhead went down with a knee injury. He's out for the year. And James White's been seeing a lot more targets. So especially in PPR leagues, I love James White. Cam's looking his way more often.
Yeah.
You go ahead, Aldo.
No, I'm sorry. I've got Miles Sanders against the Packers, and that's mostly because of the matchup. Miles really let me down last week. In fact, the backup, Boston Scott, outperformed him, and I was like, holy cow, what's going to go on here? Yeah, you always hate it as a fantasy football owner where your number one running back is being outplayed by the backup running back, and then you get scared that the following week, that your number one guy is not going to play well. Well, my gut tells me, and some of the information that I've picked up along the way, is that Miles Sanders is a solid start against the Packers. Packers defense, as you saw, if you saw that Monday night game against the Bears, their run defense is just not very good. Miles Sanders, So I'm not too worried about Boston Scott. I really believe that Sanders, he's actually been getting a lot of touches. He's had a total of 17 touches in consecutive games prior to week 12. So I anticipate that he's just going to get back there. And so I like that matchup against the Packers.
I love it, Aldo. I love it big time. It's hard to imagine, his backup outperforming him many more times. I just don't see it happening. So I'm with you there. And moving on to wide receiver, Aldo, this week, my start of the week, a wide receiver, I'm going to go with my guy, Sterling Shepard, going against the Seahawks. Seahawks are the worst secondary in football. They are just getting absolutely murdered every single week. This is the first week in a long time that they didn't go too crazy in giving up points.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the Giants offense is a different challenge for them. They also have Gallman that's going to open things up for play action. I expect Sterling Shepard to have a really big day, score at least one touchdown, and be close to 100 yards. So I love Sterling Shepard and this Giants offense this week.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier in the show about the challenges the Browns offense had and with bad weather conditions for 3 straight weeks. Well, last week, the weather was favorable. They played very well. Landry torched the Jaguars for 8 catches and 140-some yards and a touchdown on 11 targets. This week, the weather in Tennessee is going to be favorable. They say in the 50s and sunny weather. I anticipate that Jarvis Landry is going to have a really good game against the Tennessee Titans this week. So I got him on my list here.
I love it, Aldo. I think Landry's going to go off. I mean, that Baker Mayfield is a guy that's really starting to turn it on. That Browns team's turning it on. So I think he'll have a great day out there. And let's switch gears to tight ends the start of the week. I'm going to go with Robert Tonyan against the Eagles. Aaron Rodgers is starting to look Tonyan's way more often, and I just really think that Tonyan is getting to be more of a part of that offense in a game that they're probably going to lean on the run. And I think Tonyan could be that surprise guy that's wide open in the middle of the field. He had a couple plays like that last week. Rodgers, well, I don't want to say he missed him, but he kind of missed him. So I think this week he really puts it all together. So I would start Tonyan wherever you can.
Well, and I apologize. I forgot to put my list together for the tight end position. So I am going to give you TJ Hackerson against the Chicago Bears, the Detroit Lions tight end. I got a feeling that, TJ has just been improving and everybody, I remember Shane Marsaw just being so high on him, a kid out of Alabama when he came into the draft and so forth. And his development has not gone as quickly as expected, but there's no doubt about it that this guy is going to be a quality tight end. I got a feeling that he's going to have his way on those matchups with Danny Trevathan and with the problems that the Lions offense is getting. I got a feeling he's going to get some quality targets against the Chicago Bears and the Bears hopefully are going to win that game, but I got a feeling TJ is going to have a good matchup. So hopefully I'm wrong about that one, but right about everything else.
I could definitely see it happening. I think especially if Galladay misses this game, I think he'll be a big part of this offense. So that's a great call out, Aldo. I love it. And we got one. Oh, actually, I forgot to talk about the sit of the week.
Yeah.
Let's go to our sit of the week, the guy that you need to leave riding the bench. And I'm going to go with the quarterback for the Lions, Detroit Lions, that is, Matthew Stafford going against the Bears. The Bears secondary last week didn't look good, but I think they're going to get kicked in the ass by Matt Nagy and the rest of that coaching staff. I expect that Bears defense to kick it back into gear. If they want to beat the Bears, they're going to have to run it.
Good pick there. I am picking Zeke Elliott of the Cowboys against the Ravens. And I know that I wanted to be a little provocative here. So I said, well, let me look at the matchups and so forth. And I just feel like with all the problems that the Cowboys have having with their offensive line, the fact that, Dalton and the wide receivers are, it's not Dak Prescott and those wide receivers. So I just got a feeling that the Ravens defense is going to figure out a way to bottle up Ezekiel Elliott. The Ravens are in a kind of a must-win situation with the loss today. So what do they do on defense? You got to stop the run. Some good old-fashioned football. So if you've got Zeke Elliott in your team and you rely on him as a number one running back, I'm asking you to look at your bench and see what the matchups are. This might be a week where you should consider sitting him.
I totally agree, although I'm really, really sleeping on Zeke. He usually bottles that up and uses it, but he doesn't have much of an offensive line to do any work for him. So I agree with you there. I love that call out. It's very provocative, but I think it's very true. We'll wait and see, but I love that call out, Aldo. And then last but not least, we always close things out with our super sleeper of the week. And I'm digging real deep into the sleeper basket, Aldo. I'm going to go with Brashard Perriman, a Jets wide receiver against the Raiders. The Raiders are giving up around 31 points per game, and their secondary is not great. Mm-hmm. So I think if there's ever a game for Brashard Perriman to break loose, I think it's going to be this one. So I think Brashard Perriman has a decent game. I think he could probably put up 10 fantasy points, and for a sleeper, that's a win. So I like Brashard Perriman this week against the Raiders.
Now, would you consider Frank Gore a super sleeper?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. Well, then I did good. I got him down as a super sleeper. LaMichael Pirine, who I was high on because I saw him based again on Shane Marsaw's advice. He really liked the kid in college. And so when I saw him down at the Senior Bowl, he had an excellent week. And so I've been kind of waiting for the Jets to get him more and more snaps. And just at a point where that started to happen, he gets an ankle injury, so he's out. So I anticipate that Adam Gase is going to ride Frank Gore like he has for other games. He seems to have a good matchup against this Raiders team. So my super sleeper is Frank Gore. Go with the old pro. He is headed to the Hall of Fame, so maybe he's going to get you some good fantasy points before he gets to the Hall.
Hey, I like it, especially for people that are desperate for a running back. I think he'll probably have a better day than Zeke, so that's saying a lot. So you could play Zeke over Frank Gore over Zeke. Talk about a hot take.
Yeah, I would actually do that if anyone asked me. Now I'm not the fantasy football expert. The Goon is, and the Tooch are, but sitting in here, that would be my gut feel. I would definitely start Gore over Zeke, and you got to take some chances sometimes, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. But a well-informed chance is one that you should go to bed on and sleep comfortably on.
Absolutely, man. And we got one question here from Ron Rupp now. Is it time to drop J.D. McKissick? Well, it's interesting. I don't think you can drop him just yet because obviously Antonio Gibson's been great. Adrian Peterson got some carries last week and scored some pretty decent fantasy points. He got a touchdown. But I think McKissick is a guy that's going to catch a lot of balls out of that backfield. I don't think you give up on him yet, especially with the playoffs around the corner. So I say you hold on to McKissick. I like him. I have him in a handful of leagues, and I'll probably end up starting him at least once, maybe twice, because of that PPR potential.
Yeah, I think, and when those are always good questions, when you've got to look at who's available, you got to look at who's on your team, out of the blue, with just limited information, I would agree with Joe that he still has the capability of providing some production down the line. But if there's some intriguing guys on the waiver wires, then you should consider it. It's better to ask me, should you drop McKissick and pick up so-and-so? Then, I can give you a better answer. But right now, based on just that kind of general question, I would probably agree with Joe and say, hold on to him, and you might get some dividends down the road here.
Absolutely, brother. And we covered a ton of ground tonight, Aldo.
Ooh, boy.
I gave people a lot of fantasy advice. I appreciate you staying up late and helping me out, filling in for the Tooch tonight.
Been
So
fun.
before we get out of here, a huge thank you to this guy, Aldo Gandia, the godfather, the barkeeper, the guy who keeps the bar room rugged and fully stocked full of beer. Oh, and we got a really good question
You
here.
gotta answer this one before we go.
Bobby, should I trade Hopkins? If you could trade him, I would trade him because as Aldo and I were talking about a little bit earlier, that playoff schedule is absolutely brutal for the Cardinals. They get the Giants, the Eagles, and the 49ers to close things out. And, you know, what I'm seeing out of Kyler Murray the last couple of weeks is not encouraging. So I would trade him if you could. I mean, if you have Thielen, Hopkins, and Jefferson, should I trade Hop and Thielen? Yeah, I mean, I would see what you could get in return. I think Hop and Thielen would give you the most return in a trade. So if you could get, you know, I don't know what your weaknesses are on your team, but if you can get a top running back and then trade for a different wide receiver, I think that would put you in a good position for the playoffs. It sounds like you got a lot of good weapons. So I think I would make that deal depending on what I think I would make those trades depending on who you get in return.
Yep. I'm with you. I'll definitely entertain trading Hopkins. I would, you know, you're operating from a position of strength. And so that's how you approach the trade negotiations is here's the, you know, a dynamite wide receiver, a number one wide receiver. He says, he also writes, I think I can get Terry from Hop.
Terry McLaurin.
Yeah.
I would try to get something else with Terry because
totally
Terry's great. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not trading Hop straight up for Terry. I would drop Hopkins for Terry and running back 2.
Yep, I totally agree. And so also when you do 2-for-1 trades, you got to also factor in that you're dropping a guy. So that in essence makes it a 2-for-2 trade. Don't think that it's really a 2-for-1 because unless you have an empty roster spot, it really is a 2-for-2 trade because you're eliminating somebody from
drop somebody.
Yeah, so I would very aggressively try to fleece whoever is in trade negotiations. Start at the very top and go after their best player or best players. And then, you know, there's going to be negotiation. You'll work your way down and then see what you get in return. But yeah, you're operating with a guy like Hopkins, you're operating from a position of strength. And then you've got Thielen. You know, if the trade negotiations go to a point where, you know, the guy says, no, man, you're asking for too much and so forth, then you can turn around and say, well, okay, what do you give me for Thielen? So, again, I think you're operating from some strength here. Good luck with your trade negotiations.
Yeah, and he's asking for his trade if we don't recommend having 2 Vikings wideouts. I do not recommend it right now. You don't want to have too many eggs in one basket, especially for the playoffs. So if you can unload one of them, I would unload Thielen just because he's the big name. But I would only have one if you could. And then we do have one more question here.
We're going to be here all night, brother.
I know. This is going to be our last question because Aldo's had a crazy long day, and this show is probably the longest of the season. But Jason, we're going to answer your question. Should I trade Rahim Mostert for Chris Carson? I wouldn't. I mean, they're kind of the same guy right now, and Mostert and Carson both a little bit banged up, but Mostert on the healthy end, coming back from injury. Carson more banged up. Carson didn't look so great yesterday. He did score a touchdown. I don't know. I don't think it's worth making the move because they're the same guy. And let me look at their playoff schedules real quick because I have it in front of me. The 49ers, they get
while you're doing that, I'm just going to answer this question real quick from Mark. He asked Miles Sanders over DeAndre Swift, and my feeling is after the tongue lashing that Bears defense took from Matt Nagy, I'm betting that the Bears defense is going to be fired up and they're going to have a really good game against Detroit. I could be wrong. But nonetheless, I like the matchup for Miles Sanders this week, so I would say him over DeAndre Swift. I could be totally wrong. Swift could come out and say, yeah, I remember dropping that pass. Or what it cost us week 1, got my coach fired probably. So, that's a tough matchup, but I like I like Sanders over Swift, and part of that probably is a little bit of homerism on my part. So
Yeah, Swift has been out with concussion the last 2 weeks, so if he does come back, he will be fresh, and he's a big part of that offense. I lean towards Swift personally because Miles Sanders just isn't looking great, but like Aldo said, the defense could come in and change things up for the Bears quite a bit this week.
it's a tough choice.
So it is a tough choice, no doubt. And getting back to the Mostert Carson trade, the 49ers during the playoffs have Washington, Dallas, and Arizona, which is really, really pretty good for running backs. And then if you go to Seattle, their schedule is a little bit, it's about the same. You get the Jets, you get Washington, and then you get the Rams. The only thing I don't like is the Rams during championship week. They're pretty close. The Jets matchup in week 1 will be great for Carson.
Mm-hmm.
But between Washington and the Rams, I don't love it. So I prefer the 49ers because then you get Dallas and Arizona for the semifinal and the final. I just don't think it's worth making that deal right now unless you really are worried about the first round of the playoffs. Then if you want to make that trade to get that Jets matchup for week 1, then do it. But besides from that, I wouldn't recommend it.
Good advice. Joe, man, this has been a blast. Thanks very much for having me on.
Oh, no problem, brother. Huge thank you to you, Aldo, and all the other great hosts and shows on the Barroom Network. There's so many. We talked about Draft on Tap coming up tomorrow night, Aldo. What time does that start?
We're starting at 8 p.m. And again, it's the executive director of the Reese's Senior Bowl. This is Jim Nagy. He's a longtime NFL scout. This guy knows college football players. So if you like the NFL draft, you got to tune in to this show. We got Danny Shimon and Neil Stopchinski, our barroom draft analysts. These guys spend the time looking at tape. They've been studying since the last 2 weeks when I told them that Nagy was coming onto the show. They've been looking at tape for all of these seniors that have announced that they're going to the Senior Bowl. So the discussion between those two guys and Jim Nagy is going to be great. I'm going to sit back for a good portion of the show and just listen to them. And then I'm going to hop in there and talk with Nagy about some Bears related stuff. And then after that, the three of us, Neil, Danny, and myself, we got tons of Chicago Bears talk after that. And again, from the perspective of looking ahead and trying to help Ryan Pace or whoever the general manager is, how to build the roster for 2021 and beyond. So it's going to be a fun show tomorrow. And we've also got Greg Gabriel and David Schuster previewing the Bears' upcoming game.
Going to be an unbelievable day for the Barroom. Great shows. Make sure you tune in. Also want to make sure I thank everybody in the chat that hung out with us all night. I can't possibly name you all because there's a ton of people that ask questions. So thank you guys from the bottom of our hearts for tuning in and asking the questions. And last but not least, sending a vacation aloha to our buddy John Santucci, the Tooch, who's out probably drinking beer and a margarita somewhere in Cancun. So cheers to you, brother. Excited to have you back next week, but loved having Aldo on today. Enjoy your vacation. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Fantasy Football Goon Show. Again, once a huge thank you to Aldo Gandia for helping me out tonight. And go win your fantasy matchups. Go make the fantasy playoffs. And we'll see you guys live on Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Central for the Sunday edition. See you guys then. Thanks again.